I am Gary Bowles, Chair for the Future of Work with Singularity University, and welcome to our Next Learn series on the future of learning. This session is going to be focused on the skills of tomorrow, where we're going to explore a wide range of different ideas about human skills. I want to thank my guests, Ronit and Jacob, for joining me. I also want to thank Ryan Meredith for being our wonderful back-end producer. Now, what I'd love to ask you to do, we really love to make these as interactive sessions as possible. So please, on the chat line, tell us your name and where you're coming in from. We'd love to know about you. And then as we go along in the session, we'd love to hear your questions and your thoughts. And we'll treat those as sort of two different things. As I'm posting in the chat line, so if you've got a question, please start it with a question mark so we can catch it in the chat stream. And if you've got more of a thought or a shout out or something you want to say to the people who are on the session, then start it with an exclamation point so we can parse the chat stream a little better. But please make this as interactive as possible. This is how we hear from you, and this is how we learn. So let's dive into it. Why is it that we're focusing so much on human skills? Well, I want to make the case that we are at a critical junction point for humans, work, and learning. I wrote a piece back in early March 2020 that I called The Great Reset. And my thesis was that this is not just a pause in the way that so many of us are working and learning. This is actually a pivot point. And in those resets in the past, there have been a variety of different ways that people have reacted, they've adapted, and there's a variety of different ways that ultimately we come out of those periods. And some people do really, really well. They adapt very, very quickly, and others don't. And so this is one of those challenging but opportunistic times for us as humans to be able to figure out more about our human skills, to figure out how we can solve more problems, how organizations can leverage the skills of people, how we can ensure that more people have access to meaningful, well-paid work and to learning opportunities throughout their lives. So that's where I think we have an opportunity together to try to conceive of how we can do that, going forward. So Ronit, I want to start with you. Please tell people a little bit about your organization and your focus and why it is that skills matter for you.
Sure. So first of all, thank you so much, Gary, for having me. It's great to be here. Great to be here with Jake. I'm a big fan. Skills are essential because there is such a disconnect, as you mentioned, between what students and young people are going to need to succeed and what the demands of the workforce and the future workforce look like. So I lead a company, it's a talent tech company called Localized. And what we do is we connect students and recent graduates primarily in emerging markets to industry experts who can guide them and employers to hire them. And the thinking is that with such exponential change in every sector, from fintech, medtech, edtech, AI, robotics, et cetera, the people who are best placed to enter the workforce and succeed are those who have social capital, those who can ask others who are working in the field. So if you're a Stanford graduate, you're set, because all you have to do is call up a bunch of Stanford alumni and they can tell you about the trends and what's coming. But if you're a student in, let's say, Ramallah or Amman or you name it, I mean, we work primarily in the Middle East, North Africa at the moment. It's not so simple. If you're elite, you have access to those networks. And so I'm very passionate about connecting students and recent graduates to the people who are working at the vanguard to be able to transfer the knowledge that you would otherwise gain from osmosis and make sure that people are really poised, not just on the hard skills, but also on the, and not just the soft skills, but on awareness of where the gaps lie so that they can then tailor their education accordingly.
That's awesome. So, and I definitely want to come back to some of the challenges and opportunities especially in developing economies. Jacob, tell us about your work.
Yeah, great to be here, everybody. And it's awesome, by the way. I've just noticed on the chat, just so many people from all over the world on this. So great to be connected to everybody. So my name is Jacob Shu. I'm the CEO of a company called Catalyte. We are a talent transformation company that really, does three things. Our technology platform uses AI and data science to first discover exceptional potential, discover exceptional talent hidden in plain sight. People, frankly, who would not have the pedigrees that you would expect to become great engineers. But we then actually, once we discover this incredible potential, we then unlock that potential with, with training programs. We put people through the equivalent of a 2-year CS degree in just 6 months. But then it doesn't stop there. We go on to help them become some of the top performers and leaders in the engineering profession over time using our technology platform. Today, we have over 1,000 alumni now of people who've either come through the company or come through a program that was built on top of our technology. And again, these are people who may have never touched a keyboard before, but we have over 24 CIOs and CTOs now in that network. So these are people who have actually gone from non-traditional careers and gone on to the ultimate of success. So we are using data science and AI to prove the adage that talent and ability truly is evenly distributed, even if opportunity has been, and we're trying to bring that opportunity to more people.
No, that's awesome. So, and I definitely want to come back to sort of the role of technology in a lot of this process as well. So, Bernie, you mentioned both hard and soft skills. So can you just help people understand a little bit? We use these labels a lot. And unfortunately, because each of us as humans, we don't have like a Fitbit for skills. There's nothing that tells us, what we're good at, what we're not. As I often say, when you're born, the nurse doesn't come to your parents and say, oh, it's a beautiful child, and here's the user manual. We have user manuals for things like these digital distraction machines we carry around, but there's nothing that helps us to understand our skills. So help us break down sort of the difference between those categories of skills and why it's important.
Absolutely. So, what has traditionally been referred to as hard skills are those technical skills that are usually industry specific. They need to be acquired. They are often a prerequisite to doing certain things. So if you want to be a doctor, for example, you're going to have to study the human body, going through certain processes, and there are certain courses you're going to need to take, and you're going to need to understand certain systems within the body. And that's going to require learning and training. Right. And so hard skills refer to the specific technical expertise, whether it is it's industry agnostic. So it can be in the legal profession or in the medical profession. I'm sure there are others that will have a more academic definition, but that's generally the category of hard skills. Soft skills, also referred to as essential skills. There's a lot of debate around what the terminology should be, but those are skills that are often around leadership, around communication, around managing teams, around being adaptable, flexible, agile, having your follow through, how timely are you in certain ways. So some of them can be acquired. They can all certainly be honed, but they're not always emphasized. And that's often a big gap. So for example, we work with employers across EMEA, so Middle East, North Africa, and India. What we find is that employers, when you ask them, what are you hiring for? What's the number one thing you look for? Soft skills is usually at the top. So the hard skills often will determine whether people get excluded from eligibility, right? If you don't have certain prerequisites, if you don't understand Python, and that's a coding language that's required for the role, you're not going to be considered. But the differentiators tend to be those other attributes, those other elements that have to do with your work ethic, your attitude, your communication abilities, your abilities to work with teams and synthesize information, et cetera. And there is a much greater degree of respect for those competencies and skills and ways to identify them and quantify them and evaluate them now than there was 10 or 15 years ago.
So Jake, I think that Ronnie just set you up perfectly. So because so much of what you're focused on are both these extremely in demand, what I often call knowledges rather than hard skills, but basically information knowledge that's anchored in things like programming and data science. And then, but then there's also these aspects of working with teams and being able to continually get work done and so on, that you're also not just helping people to learn, but you're using technology to help them do that. So can you just explain a little bit about that model?
Yeah, no, that's great. And thanks, Gary. And Ronita, I'll build on exactly what you said, right? So, Catalyte today, we're very focused on engineering jobs, right? So software engineers, data engineers, you name it. And the beginning point of what we do starts with really 20 years of engineering outcome data, right? So we have 20 years of engineering outcome data that basically is pulled from production systems And that serves a purpose it serves one purpose, which is to help us define and measure excellence. So what does excellence mean, right? You can actually very quickly through data, you can measure excellence in a tech role across 36 different dimensions. Now, once we do that, what the technology enables us to do is actually back test and discover what are these innate underlying human behaviors that actually drive long-term success and performance, right? And I'm glad you pointed this out, Gary. Like, we don't know what to call it. It may be skills, it may be knowledges. We just call them behaviors, right? And these behaviors are many of the same things that Ronit was mentioning, right? So if you look at long-term success for engineers, we generally split them into 4 categories. Some of them are very obvious, right? They're hard skills. So for example, under the category we call delivering value, we'll sort of measure to see how often or how consistent is an individual in terms of delivering consistent code quality. We will measure and look at over time, do they meet their engineering requirements? And deliver on what they say they're going to deliver? Those are kind of obvious. Other ones are sort of harder to suss out, right? So you think about something like teamwork. And frankly, most employers have no way of really assessing this. But for example, in our teamwork, we will actually measure, for example, how often an individual is actually helping solve other team members' blocking issues, right? Are they helpful, right? We will measure how responsive they are to other team members' requests on chat channels, right, on Slack, right? So we'll ingest Slack data and we can actually see how quickly people respond to questions. And there are others, right, that are completely hard to assess, right? So for example, stakeholder satisfaction. We will actually measure and see how often does an individual respond appropriately to unreasonable stakeholder requests, right? That's something that frankly is the job of the profession of being an engineer. Continuous growth, right? We will measure how often and how quickly will an individual pick up additional tech stacks and apply them in their job, right? So these are all dimensions of professional skills that can be shaped over time. And what we do is that we actually take those behaviors and we work backwards through the hiring funnel to essentially find people who have attributes that will predict that we can shape those behaviors into them. People come in through essentially an online screening and assessment. And that assessment is going through about over 500 different prediction models to predict, we look at how does a person think, right? How do they process information? How do they synthesize facts? Do they change their minds if they're presenting with new facts and new evidence? We can measure determination and perseverance, tenacity. These are all sort of attributes that, again, when we kind of find people who score high enough, we know that as long as you have those innate attributes, we can deliver the technical skills to you, right? So you'll notice nothing I've said, talks about tech skills, right? I've not mentioned anything about coding or programming or anything like that. We're talking about innate, fundamental sort of behaviors.
So you've actually, there's a whole bunch of different aspects of what you just talked about that I think we need to dive into. But basically what you've done, I just want to make sure we're calling out for people. So a couple of things. So first off, just to make sure people know sort of the language, you mentioned blocking. That's where somebody's on the critical path and you need to help them to be able to get through that and off the critical path so they're not blocking somebody else's way. And then you also mentioned stakeholders. And so this is a very important aspect of sort of agile processes, which is that the customer is the ultimate stakeholder, but there's lots of other stakeholders that are involved too. Often that's a very complex calculus. Your team, there are stakeholders as well. And so figuring out how all that sort of, the best way to be able to deliver value for all those stakeholders is actually part of the process. So, but having said that, so now we've got essentially the information, the knowledges and the training that we want somebody to be able to develop, the skills to be able to perform the work of a particular arena. And then there's all this sort of wrapper stuff, which we often call soft skills, but it's essentially these other skills. And you've got ways for some of the most critical ones to be able to have not just the process that teams go through in talking about and trying to develop these for each of the team members, but there's software that's actually helping to sort of manage that process and understand and help them to improve. So Ronit, help us understand, what are some other ways to approach this with, not necessarily just technical skills, but other arenas? And especially because so many of the challenges in developing economies, as you say, you called out the challenge of not having a network, for instance, the social capital, but there's also simply just pure access to training, pure access to being able to have, be able to locate work to be done and so on. So how do you think about that, especially in some of these developing economies? And what are some of the ways that you've seen to be able to solve that?
Yeah, so I think we're in a new moment historically where it used to be that if you grew up somewhere and you left, your knowledge was gone, right? And that might be considered brain drain. So I'm originally from Montreal. I've left Montreal. My knowledge, my expertise is gone. And there were about 6 ways that you could continue to give back to your communities of heritage, but most of them were either episodic or, you could buy things or visit or volunteer. But we're in a new moment where just because you have left your community of heritage doesn't mean your knowledge has to be gone. So if you think about the remittance economy being a $600 billion annual economy, the knowledge remittance economy is actually bigger. It's just never been channeled at scale. And so one of the things that animates me, that I am most passionate about, is the fact that we can treat communities the way that universities engage alumni communities. So if you think about the top universities in the world, they engage their alumni for that social capital, for those insights, for those experiences, so that you're able to tap into those individuals to open doors, to make introductions, to talk about what they're seeing. That can now be done because of our level of connectivity, because of the penetration of mobile technologies and devices and internet connection. You can be an Egyptian co-founder of a $1 billion cloud computing company in Silicon Valley, and you could be sharing your insights for students at a public university in Cairo seamlessly, the way that an alumni would. And so you can disaggregate the elite network component and actually reconnect it based on affinities, based on shared concerns. And so, and for us, I think the deep piece beneath that is that you need to know what's out there and what's possible in order to reach for it. And we've seen that, I've seen that very personally, where if you have what we call, it's our jargon internally, these proximate role models, people that you look at those individuals and you think, okay, if that person can do it, maybe I can too. If you have those individuals, you're going to reach farther and harder than you might otherwise. And just to wrap with a concrete example, one of the experts who's shared his expertise on localized is in charge of product marketing across Google for the MENA region. And he attributes his position today to an hour-long presentation that was given by a Microsoft employee to his senior class. But that employee was a fellow Jordanian, and he had to see someone like him from a community like his, not elite, work at a company like Microsoft to believe it was possible for him to end up at a company like Google. And I'm not saying tech companies are the be all and end all. I'm industry agnostic on this front, but I think the idea that you reach for what you know is feasible. And so the more examples you have of that, the more you're going to challenge yourself. And so we're big believers in tapping into those expert networks globally to share that at scale.
No, I think that's marvelous. So the underpinning of that to me is a phrase that we actually use with programs that are in inner cities in America, which is you can't be what you can't see. So you first have to have those role models. You have to feel that it's possible, and then when you say proximate, just to unpack that for people, it's if we see somebody that's a role model, but they're doing something that just looks way too far away. Like if I'm a coal miner and I look at an AI programmer and I think that is a bridge too far. Like it's just I can't get my mind around what that might be. But if somebody showed me, oh, you could be doing data analysis for mineral deposits around the world that leverages your mining knowledge and gets you to start to do data science, so you could then go the next step and eventually, oh, okay, I kind of get that now. So proximate or adjacent, what we often call adjacent.
Gary, if I may, or you're shown a former coal miner who then went on, right? Like that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. It depends on my mindset. It also, because essentially what I hear you talking about is agency, right? It's you want someone to have the agency. If you can get your mind around jumping from coal miner to programmer, awesome. If you need something that's a smaller step that helps you, that you feel is the more reasonable thing to reach, and you can do it sooner, that's awesome too. But having that agency and having those goals and going in that direction are really important. So Jake, I'm sorry we lost you for a second there. Welcome back. But you know, these are the challenges of our time and our technology, right? Um, so actually, one question here that's not attributed, but somebody was asking. So you were talking about trying to help people to continually be better and better, and and hopefully ultimately achieve excellence and that kind of thing. How do you do that? Is it an assessment? Is it questionnaires? Or how are you helping people to continually understand how they can get better at things?
That's a great question. So it begins, every person who comes into Catalyte or through any of the companies who are leveraging our technology comes in the same way. They're not recruited. They basically come in by taking an online screening. Now you can call it an assessment. We don't really do that. We call it a screening simply because it's not a test, right? So it's not an aptitude test. Now it looks like one, but people essentially go through about a 90-minute online screening. The secret of this, and now it looks like a standard aptitude test, a verbal section, a math section, a puzzle section. The secret of it is that it's not a test and that your answers are not that predictive. In fact, you could get half the answers wrong on this test and still score high enough to get in. You could get 90% of the questions correct and still not get in, because the secret is that we're actually watching how you take that test, right? We're timing your answers, we're checking your keystrokes. We're able to find, by watching how you approach a difficult aptitude test, we can suss out a whole lot more about how you react and how you think than actually if you know the answer to a random math question. But once you score high enough the assessment, you come in, you're then offered a spot to join our training program. It's half of it is self-paced, half of it is done with lecturers, but essentially you complete a training, a 26-week training program. It's equivalent to a two-year CS degree. But the training doesn't stop there. In fact, the training there, and by the way, all of this is data driven. From the moment you come in, take that screening, to the moment you leave, you're an alumni of the program. We're ingesting data about what you're doing, right? And we use data to very quickly synthesize how quickly you're progressing, right? Through the training program, we deliver the tech skills so you can be proficient right off the bat on in a real live job environment. But the learning then continues, right? And as I mentioned earlier about some of those professional behaviors, I can't simulate stakeholder satisfaction, right, in a classroom. I can't really simulate teamwork in a classroom. And so what we need to be able to do is actually deliver a lot of the professional development in the flow of the work or on the job. And so the technology continues to ingest actual work products. So we are ingesting data directly from Jira, from Slack, from other production systems that basically helps us to pinpoint the progress based on the actual work being produced by an apprentice. And the system will synthesize that and provide over typically 2 weeks, but it's any time increment, it'll provide what we call a precision feedback plan that continues to kind of assess, okay, this is exactly where you are. This is what you've done in the last week. This is what you need to improve. And then it will give you prescriptive measures to kind of keep moving up that learning path to meet what we call an excellence profile. Again, all of this is driven by data. And at the end of the day, I mean, what the technology end to end does, it accelerates people's learning, right? So we have independent, verification now that through this process of sort of, training and then on the job sort of coaching and guiding, you actually get people there in about half the time. So we've shown about 105% acceleration in terms of learning, which means we cut that learning journey in half, using this technology. And our people come out of this in about 2.5 years with the same skills and competences as an engineer who's been working post-college and been working in different jobs for about 5 years. And we've mapped that all the way back to Microsoft's competency and career progression model.
So this is exactly one of the elements that I push on a lot when people think about the intersection of technology and work and technology and learning is that the tool set actually is about helping to enhance human skills, develop human skills. It's not, you didn't create a whole bunch of AI to replicate all those tasks those humans were performing. You're actually using the software to help them to develop and the data as well. I mean, this one thing Mandy is asking, are we going to be sort of slaves to the data to some extent? If we just look way back and we have all the bias that's baked into that, or are we going to continually be updating the data? And especially, is that going to not just be in the tight lens of the work to be done, but are we helping people to actually have more balanced lives in doing that as well? So Ronit, one of the things that is critical in this process is not only do we often we can't be what we can't see, but we also don't know what it is that people that would pay us money would want us to do. What's the work to be done? What are those skills that they need? What is the fastest way I can learn those skills? So how can we help people to think about what those employer requirements are and how more of that information can be made available? So even if you have great agency, you might not know, what the work market might have available.
Absolutely. So, I think that often by the time it's taught at a university level, it's already late in terms of the content. Obviously, it depends if it's medicine, perhaps not, or, there are certain fields or law, but frankly, elements of all of those sectors are changing so quickly. I don't think there's a way around. Certainly people can use the internet, right? So self-educating, there are all kinds of ways to do it, listening to podcasts and reading, blogs and all of that. I think there's no substitute for hearing directly from the people who are the practitioners. I think it's essential. It may not be sufficient, right? So, but at least to give you, so for example, one of the experts on localized used to be the director of tech and innovation for the US Olympic Committee. He's originally from Lebanon, and he's looking at trends in sports tech. Now, if you're somebody who's passionate about sports and you have no idea what you want to become and not any, nothing beyond sports animates you, understanding that that actually is a career path where there are all kinds of roles in the industry that you could embrace is motivating, right? And people will actually reach higher when they're motivated by something that taps into their emotions and their passions. And there's tons of data on learning in the learning sciences about that. So I think finding those, and you can find it through alumni communities. Certainly, we would love if there are folks for whom this is relevant to, come sign up for Localize. It's free for you to do so, but it's not the only way. I think that finding those, it doesn't have to be a mentor. So the thing I want to make a distinction about is that you don't need a mentor with whom you are meeting one-on-one on a recurring basis to be able to absorb that type of information. Sometimes it's just a conversation. It's coming to these kinds of events and having those conversations that turns you on to either a set of vocabularies or types of roles or disciplines, and then you have to go deeper. And then I think those soft skills kick in, right? How diligent are you? How thorough are you? How driven are you? And of course, resources play a role. But even in the resource space, for example, like one of our partners is a free online data science master's degree program. It's World Quant University. On our, they're a partner of ours on Localize. That's free. And so we have tons of students in places like Nigeria or the Philippines or other places all around the world who are upskilling because that's something that they're interested in doing. So I don't think it's always resource contingent to be able to tap into those opportunities.
It's funny you should mention World Quant. Daphne's an old friend, so it's funny. It's always a small world. So a couple of things that you said, I'm sure we're going to get some interesting reaction from folks. So first off, by saying at the university level, it's already too late. I'm sure there's a number of educators that might want to challenge that in certain arenas, but I think generally I'm going to just support it. That what's ended up happening is we've actually created learning systems where there's a significant propagation delay. That is, we've said, oh, there's this construct that we call a 4-year degree, and we're going to sort of hermetically seal you in this wonderful environment, which has all these tremendous benefits. But there's this real world over here, and we'll eventually eject you, and you can go into it. And what I think we know, we've got plenty of data now about how people learn best and how we make sure that it is going to lead to meaningful, well-paid work. We know that solving real-world problems. We know doing that in cohorts with other people. It's a team sport. We know that more and more learning is going to be just in time and just in context. That is, Jacob's not, I get everything I say because it's exactly what he's doing. It's just the information you need to solve that problem in front of you. It's not some theoretical, 5-year degree or 7-year degree, whatever. It's the things that I need to be able to solve the problems, and it's in context. That is, I'm solving the problems that are like the problems I'll be solving in the work, and ideally, it's even done as an apprenticeship because then I'm getting compensated for the work. And so, universities have the capacity to be able to adjust to this. And I think actually one of our questions was exactly that. Is I think Rick Patilla was asking about how this can be practice-based learning can transform universities. That is exactly the opportunity, is to have the real world not shut out from that learning environment. It's to bring it in. And what Jacob has done is actually bring people into the learning environment in the context of doing the work, so that the learning is faster and more appropriate. So, but some of the questions that keep, I don't know, Jake, you got some response to that, Jacob, or because I don't want to cut you off. Go ahead.
No. I was just going to say, I absolutely agree. Like, I absolutely agree with everything you've said in context learning, obviously. And I also definitely agree that universities can have sort of reimagining in terms of being a hub for employers, right? Because again, I think a lot of, where I think we've sort of too narrowly defined what a university or what training institutions do, right? And I think a big part of of what we can really start to think about is how do universities serve as an on-ramp, but really continue that training, continue that professional development on the job, right? So enable employers to do that. Because at the end of the day, what's going to happen over time is that every profession in the future is going to continue to evolve dynamically, right? So tech is just the canary in the coal mine here, right? Every job is going to be one where you're going to have to continually reacquire new skills and learn new professional skills. And that's got to be delivered in context and on the job.
And you're starting to see that with universities that are bringing boot camps in, so that that's part of the university offering. You're seeing that, I know in Jordan, for example, there's a university called HTU, which is a year of practical experience that's built into the degree. So you are seeing that beginning to happen. The one thing that I just want to clarify so that people don't walk away thinking that I'm being down on universities. One thing that I think is critical for universities that they do, and I think we need more of, is giving you a framework for interpreting the world, right? So understanding our history, understanding our geography, understanding our politics, our ethics, understanding how to be citizens of the world, those types of questions about, the good and our moral responsibilities and ethical obligations and what kind of work environment do we want to create. Those are questions that do require reflection that may not be driven by employers in a given moment. And those questions are essential. We talked about this the other day where an article had come out recently talking about those that go through, let's say, liberal arts training are less inclined to be swayed by authoritarianism, right? I don't know if that data is true. It was an interesting piece just to think about what is training, right? So what we've been talking about is very skills specific, employer driven, being ready for the current workforce and the workforce of the future. That may not fully align with what does it mean to be an excellent citizen, an excellent citizen of the world or of a particular nation state. And so we're going to have to balance those two things. And there is a tension there at the moment.
There's a tension, and there's also, no, I think it's great, but there is also a cost. And this is just something that we as societies, we actually have to invest in, right? Because if we could wave a magic wand in an ideal world, what would be marvelous is for every single person to have the opportunity to go off for 3 or 4 years, grow up as a human being. I often call it the young adult launchpad, build great relationships with others, learn how to be independent, think deep thoughts, understand how they could be great parents, great citizens, and so on in the future, and also learn skills that would be very, very useful to be compensated for when they get out into the real world. That would be marvelous if we could afford that for every single person. But in many economies, there is a really significant increase in the cost of those opportunities and a decreasing number of middle class and lower income families that can afford it. And so that schism, that separation between what the need is for the kinds of future humans that we want and the cost associated with it, that's what I think a lot of the friction that we're encountering is for. And so it's perfectly understandable. Many of my university friends, 5 years ago, we weren't holding their feet to the fire for all this application of that things that they're learning in the university out in the real world. And suddenly now, actually it kind of matters a lot. And the pace and spread of change are sort of the drivers, and the other drivers are, of course, that the in-demand work. We've always had these asymmetries in work markets, right? In terms of what we as humans, the skills we have and what the work market demands. There's always been in-demand skills. It's just, in the 1950s, it was repairing heaters and air conditioners. But today, the heaters and air conditioners are AI software. So that skill set will continually be in demand, and that's where unfortunately, a lot of the mentality gets calibrated for people. There's tons of other great work to be done. There's tons of other great things to learn in a university. It's just, so long as we come up with some new models that allow us to rebalance those costs and then what the value that's created to in terms of future work, now we got something. Like I think, well, I think the problem-based approach will be a lot better. So a couple of other questions. Buran was asking about general skills for finance. I'm not that deep on this, on the transferable skills for finance, but and then Hafed was asking about soft and transferable skills and about measurability. So I just want to offer sort of the construct that I've used as one example, and then I'd love to get your folks' thoughts about just from as we're talking about the skills of tomorrow, like so what your priorities are. So, and how people should think about those priorities. So one of the reasons that I've written pieces on this, I've said, oh, there's 4 that sort of jump out to me, and it's a huge universe. There's all these different transferable skills and traits, personal traits that we want to develop. But if I'm going to pick 4, you're going to hold my feet to the fire. I'm going to say it's problem solvers who are adaptive, creative, and with empathy. Problem solvers, because that's really ultimately what an employer is paying us for, is to solve problems. Adaptive, because if you only know a certain number of things today and it changes tomorrow, we know the shelf life of information, as we've said, is way too short. Creative, because if you're a creative problem solver, you're going to stay ahead of the robots and software. And then with empathy, because as humans, this is how we work together. This is how we work as part of teams, how we solve problems for customers and so on. So that's sort of what I throw over the wall. Help me from each of your perspectives. What are some of those transferable skills you would prioritize above all the others? And then do you think of them as measurable and trainable?
I would add 2 there, and I don't know in what hierarchy.
Okay.
One is around communication, and you can be extroverted, introverted. There's all kinds of ways to communicate. It can be via text or verbally, but if you don't have the ability to communicate your creativity or any of your empathy, that's going to make you less effective. And then discipline, and discipline can look different. So I'm the daughter of an engineer on one side and an artist musician on the other. Discipline looks, so creativity looks very different, and communication looks very different, and discipline looks very different. But if you don't have the discipline, if you are inconsistent in your and Jake was talking about this. If somebody is inconsistent in their follow through, inconsistent in how they deliver, then even if you're empathic and creative and all of those other things, there is going to be a gap between your ability to deliver and what the market needs. So I would say those, and I would say there was a question around bias around those. There are ways to disaggregate. You can not see the identity of somebody to see whether they follow through. There are ways to put the curtain up in terms of somebody's communication skills or they're putting forward ideas. So we can, if we're committed enough, invest in ways to try to de-bias the system further, because there is so much bias and in all of us. But these are skills that I think are essential, no matter where you are.
So it must have been marvelous having basically parents that were each side of the brain. So
Yes.
That's a tremendous.
I became a translator, I would say.
Yeah.
That explains a lot about how socially brilliant you are.
no pressure, right? So, Jacob, what are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned earlier around teamwork, and I'll tell you one of the things I learned, and I came to Catalyte about 4 years ago. We talk this fuzzy concept about teamwork, right? You think about that, and it's hard to measure something like that. And when I came to the company, one of the things that blew me away was, just this idea of helping others. Like I couldn't tell, there was something very different about, generally there was something very similar about the engineers I saw at Catalyte versus all the others I worked with. And I come from this industry, from the offshoring industry. So I built labs all over India, China, Philippines, Scandinavia. So something very familiar about the engineers I saw, but something also very different. And it came down to that teamwork aspect, that ability to help others. And that's something that I think sounds very simple, right? But it's actually quite rare in the professional workforce. And you think about the future of work, all complex problems require a team-based approach to solving them, right? So, to being a good team member is a big part of that. One of the new ones I mentioned, earlier, we have 4 general categories that we measure these behaviors under. And the 4 that we look at today are, again, sort of ability to deliver value, teamwork, stakeholder satisfaction, and that continuous growth mindset, we're narrowing down on a fifth category right now. So our data scientists are actually coming up with some interesting discoveries around independence. And maybe it's because of COVID that this has come up, but there's sort of an independence streak in terms of what drives long-term success. And the debate right now really is that part of continuous growth, or is that actually a separate category? But there's definitely something we see about this a person's sort of self-drive to be independently learn and improve themselves, that commitment to continually change and succeed. I think the other day, actually yesterday, I was on a call with a bunch of Princeton professors who were talking about disrupting the Ivy League, which is kind of a crazy conversation in of itself. But one of the things that I'd never heard before, but I thought it was so interesting, was it's a little pejorative. They talked about hill climbers versus valley crossers. And I never thought of it that way, right? But there is sort of a difference in learners, right? And they kind of talked about, what you really need are hill climbers, and you can throw anything at hill climbers and they'll grow. Whereas the valley crossers are just trying to get across that, get across this gully. So anyway, it's just kind of interesting sort of thinking about these different concepts of that secret sauce that drives success.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, and I just want to point out, Jake, you actually gave, I think, a great example of what I think of as the three legs of the skill stool. So you talked about sort of the technical skills, and then you talked about things like teamwork and working in teams. And so one of the sniff tests is that the knowledges that are anchored very deeply in an arena are typically nouns. The transferable skills are usually gerunds. They're ing. Words, so persuading, analyzing, testing, working in teams, those sorts of things. But then you also said independence, and so that's a trait. That's a thing that's true about you. That is, and we're all developing, a variety of these different things. But it's task completion. It's it's showing up on time, as Ronit was saying. So these are sort of the three legs of the stool, and it's really, really important to see them each as basically developmental pathways for each one. Because I think, as we're all in violent agreement, traditional learning has been focused so much on the knowledges, like those bodies of information, and shoving them into your head and doing it in a production model. The transferable skills, we haven't called out as much, but now we're saying absolutely, we've got to be able to do that, and we have to be able to help people to measure them more. Not just an employer, but you as an individual, right? You've got to figure out what your Fitbit for your transferable skills is. But also these traits is, what does help you to run to completion? What does help you to learn? We're all works in progress, but what helps us to be able to continually develop those personal traits, not just in the context of work.
Can I be provocative for a moment?
Provoke away.
As we're talking, I've just been thinking about the role of emotion in all of this. So, I think a lot of parents can relate to this, right? Like, you might be a night person until you have your first kid. And then suddenly, like, all of the habits that you had, all of the self-defining ways that you might be in the world suddenly turn on their head, right? And new behaviors replace those old behaviors. And you replace almost everything: how you eat, how you sleep, what you drive, where you live. That's not necessarily true for everybody, but radical, dramatic changes that happen because there's an emotional anchor that motivates you so much to change, right? And we know with learners that somebody may see themselves as undisciplined because they haven't found the emotional driver that makes them want to be on time or be early or have that continuous growth mindset. So I think there's a catalyst. Some people are they have it continuously and they're able to, or they're very curious. But for other people, they might settle into a curiosity or a passion that suddenly enables them to exhibit certain traits that they didn't necessarily know that they had. And I think part of our role is in unlocking someone's potential. You're trying to figure out what is the emotional connection that enables you to unlock traits you may not have known about yourself. Maybe suddenly you're a morning person under the right circumstances. So I don't know. I haven't seen a lot of research on this or conversation on this, but I do think that emotion. So I'm just thinking very personally, as an intern, early in my career, I was a terrible intern, horrible. I am not a page pusher. I'm a founder, right? Like I've founded multiple things, I've run things, but if you ask me to check boxes, I'm terrible and my discipline sucks and all of those things. And I think that people tend to then categorize themselves based on experiences that may just not align with their work style or their learning style. And so something about that I think is important to consider.
So I'll just give you one construct that my father, who is an author of career books that he used, that people seem to have resonated with him. That's just one lens on what you were talking about. But what he said is ultimately when we're talking about skills, and he had a process for helping people to be able to inventory their own skills. He said basically what happens is, and especially when it's transferable skills, but it might also be specific knowledges, is if you can think of the XY axis. So if the y-axis is what you love and the x-axis is what you love and the y-axis is what you're good at, right? And so you just gave an example of you're terrible at it. So like you're not good at it, I don't enjoy it, and I don't love it. Like, okay, so that's down here in the lower left corner. Like, okay, don't do that. Well, no, actually each of us, especially when we're first starting out in the world of work, we kind of have to do things down here, like make 2 piles of paper out of one. That was my first job out of high school when I barely escaped. So yes, there are things that we don't love to do and things we're not very good at. We need to make money sometimes, right? So, but eventually if we keep on doing them, we get better and better. Oh, okay, we get paid better for it. Now you get better at it. But do you love it? No. So, however, if you actually enjoy solving those problems, using those skills, working with those kinds of people, well, then you will get better and better at it. And then obviously the magic quadrant is up here. It's you love doing it and you're good at it. And so that's what an awful lot of this, when we were trial and error machines, right? Because nobody gave us that user manual of use. So it's this constant trial and error of, am I good at this? Do I love doing this? It's a game of Marco Polo with the problems that we're solving and the work situations that we're in. So now we're running a little short on time. There's so many other things I want to cover. What I want to do is I'm going to do sort of speed dating, sort of with questions, and then you guys get to pick. Right, so I'm going to give you basically 4 questions that from the group and three questions from the group and 1 from me. You guys each get to pick, and Jake, I'm going to pick on you first. But you get to pick 1 from this, and then the rest of them, we'll have to probably deal with on the community site. So Chris is asking, how can we keep older generations involved and keep them working so they contribute their skills, their experience, and their wisdom? So the first one's older people. Christina is asking, we've got all this testing going on. What are the dangers as well as the opportunities of doing psychometric and other testing? So that's the second one. The third is Rick is asking, well, all the things we're talking about, can we help guide people towards solving 21st century mega problems? And then I'm going to ask you, the fourth is about differently abled, which we haven't really talked about. Is we've been talking about, what the implied might be, these are people that, basically have, sort of all the resources they need. They just need to learn a skill and they'll be fine. But the differently abled have some big challenges. So those are questions for each of you. Older generations, testing and assessment challenges, the 21st century mega problem issue, and then the differently abled. So Jake, you first.
Wow, it's I could answer all. Those are dinner party conversations that I'd love to talk about.
Pick one to start with.
Let's start with the age one because it's the first on the list. So I'll tell you. That's one of the things that is kind of counterintuitive. We've actually found that there is, that if you look at our people who are coming in, generally whoever comes in at the top of our funnel comes out at the bottom funnel in very similar proportions, and because of that, we actually have generations of boomers now in our cohorts, right? So we have, every cohort, I usually end up with 10 to 15% of people who are over 50. The oldest person who's come through our program is 72 years old. He was actually a retired engineer who just got tired of sitting on the sidelines and want to come back to the workforce. And so he went through our program as well. So I think first is, I don't think there is this magic cutoff in terms of age that makes it such that you're not eligible or you would be disqualified to sort of, relearn or be retrained for a future career. Secondly is I think it's a really astute question around sort of the knowledge and the quote unquote wisdom and judgment that can be passed on as well. So right now, Catalyte is actually working on a model where frankly, the model works is that people come out of our training program and they become apprentices for 2 years. And during that apprenticeship, traditionally they've been coached or mentored by existing developers on our team. We're actually working with a different group to actually find third-party outside sort of, retired folks who, who have skills and have experience who can actually act as those coaches as well. So there absolutely is an important role to be played. And again, I think the important thing to point out here in terms of the ability to be a mentor or coach, it's not, people don't really need coaches to teach them technical skills. What they really need to do is teach them those professional skills, those blockers of how do I respond to this crazy request I just got from this other function, from this other functional manager in a different department. It's things like that that are really experiential that coaches and mentors can provide guidance on.
Bernie, your choice.
I'll talk about the differently abled question. I love the question. I think we're in I think we are in an era that I hope will lead to greater and greater inclusion, because a lot of the barriers to inclusion have to do with access, physical access. So I used to run a media organization in the Middle East, and I had an employee who was spectacular, who was not able to, she was not very mobile. She had to stay within a very, she couldn't walk much. And she was one of our star employees in terms of standing up an entire media outlet. And I'm a firm believer in the fact that if you have the tech tools, and if the bias has been taken away, right, where people are just being evaluated on their attributes and their skills and all the things we discussed, and you're not factoring in, are they standing or not? And I'm talking right now in this case about more physical disabilities. I understand that there are other considerations. I think that this is a time where we can and should see greater inclusion. I think we should be pushing for it. A couple of other early advisors for Localized, one had cerebral palsy, and another who is in a wheelchair. And they were advising because they saw the potential of that connectivity, of connecting people with skills and employers in a platform that leverages remote. So I think remote has a lot of potential. That said, we have to keep pushing. We have to challenge our own assumptions and then challenge the infrastructure. So certain countries, if you don't even have things like accessibility laws or the ability to adhere to those laws, even if they're not enforced, or the infrastructure is not there to make workplaces more accessible. This is a big steep hill, but I am optimistic about the fact that we're becoming more inclusive.
Wonderful. So we're running a little close to time. I just want to respond to a couple of the quick questions, and I want to give each of you a chance to do like one parting sort of thought in giving suggestions to people. So just really briefly, Candy asks about lecturers helping the students to be both relevant, employable, and still cover the syllabus. My answer, Candy, is you have to change the system. If so much of the focus is on just the sort of rote learning that people need to get throughout a school year, and then at the on the margins, you're going to try to help them to get a relevant and employable skill set, then the system is broken. So you've got to push back to actually change the paradigm. Like so much of the way this production model that we've used has to be changed. And if you go back to some of the other sessions that we've done, like on the Great Reset of Learning, we've got some examples of how that can be done with existing institutions. Jorge is asking about taking a design thinking course. Yes, do that. Design thinking is a tool. It's one of many tools. But if what you need is to learn more about the process of developing empathy for customers and to be able to develop good practices with teams, start with design thinking, but then also drill down into Agile and understand that skill set, that tool set. And then finally, Rick, about the 21st century mega problems. This is actually where I think I would just keep on urging you to come back to the su.org site and to have the conversation there. This is where I think one of the greatest opportunities for us is to continually push and nudge and challenge each other to see these problems. Unfortunately, I think that's something we could do more in our existing academic institutions as well. But certainly, we need to expose people, young and old, to the challenge, these bigger challenges. As I always say, there's lots of problems you can solve, but there's lots of people in the world who have problems that chose them. So those are the problems that we need, the big ones that we all need to be focused on. And that's why, for instance, we have things like the SDGs. That's the the Sustainable Development Goals gives us a lot of the framework and the thinking about that. So, and then Jacob, one last thing for you. There's a number of questions on the chat stream specifically about Catalyte's program. I've dropped links to both Localized and Catalyte in the chat line, but I do want to encourage people who want to learn more specifically about your program to go online. So, so with that, hopefully we hit most of the questions that came in the chat stream. We'll carry more onto the SU site, but I wanted to give, Renee, why don't you start off? Give us a closing thought to send people off with.
So I think we can start much earlier in preparing for the future of work. At the age of 4 or 5, kids can start with design thinking, tackling problems, and providing that sense of agency, that working together, that, all of those skills that right now we're starting to cultivate once they graduate high school. There's no reason for that not to start at the age of 4 or 5. So that's number one. The second thing is there is going to be anxiety around this, and we are all fearful of our own obsolescence. And it doesn't matter where you sit. I think that anxiety is real. We need to separate our anxiety and figure out how to deal with the anxiety, and not let that be a blocker to the adoption of some of the tools that help us to better assess and to better be prepared.
Excellent.
Yeah. For me, I think, maybe because I'm in America and I'm sort of in the US and thinking about COVID, is I think a lot about false negatives these days, right? And you think about our existing kind of university system, our whole sort of labor market, it's based on sort of, pedigree, right? It's based on where you went to school, where you grew up, who you know. And so if you think about it, I always find it really ironic, right? And I know a lot of the participants here, a lot of students here are in tech. The tech industry is built by people who would have been rejected by the companies that they have built, right? So Facebook today would never hire a college dropout named Mark Zuckerberg, right? Larry Ellison would never get hired by Oracle today, right? Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak would never be hired or even considered by Apple, would have been screened out by some resume filtering system today, right? So, when you really think about, like, the whole world seems to think that talent is scarce. I just leave you to tell you that, like, talent is abundant, right? We see it everywhere. It's hidden in plain sight. We just have to really think about what's broken in our existing system that's preventing us from really activating that talent.
No, awesome. You guys are both so inspirational. So I just want to give people a couple other steps to do afterwards going forward. So as I mentioned, please come to the SU.org site. We'll continue this thread. I'd love to answer more of your questions and continue the dialogue there. Venus from Singularity just posted a link to the new Idea Front platform, which you can think of as sort of basically video for curiosity. Much of the sort of ideas that both Ronit and Jacob have been talking about trying to spark people's curiosity and interest in opportunities. I want to thank Jake. I want to thank Ronit. This has been a marvelous conversation for me. We could do this for hours. I want to thank Ryan for being our incredible producer, and the entire SU community. It's wonderful to have your engagement, your involvement. We just want to encourage you to keep it up. Please go back and look at some of the other videos that we've done in this series. Be sure and tell us on the site more of the kinds of sessions like this that you'd like to see. And we look forward to interacting with you in the future. Thanks, everybody. Be well.